Greetings, scholars. In this lesson, we will look at comparing decimals. So let's get started. When comparing decimals, you can think of them in terms of columns and small squares on a hundreds grid, tenths and hundredths, and money. And just in case you're saying, what in the world is she talking about? Let's compare using columns and small squares. So let's say we have the decimal 42 hundredths, and we're comparing it to 6 tenths. Which decimal is larger? A lot of students, they get confused and they say, well, 42 is bigger than the number 6, so 42 must be bigger. And that is completely wrong. So let's look at this. What we're going to do is highlight 4200. So this 4200, this 4 is in the 10th place here. Look at this. This 4 is in the 10th place. So we're going to highlight 4 tenths. A tenth is a column. Here's 1/10 of the whole, that whole column. Then we're going to highlight another tenth. That is 2 columns now. I call that whole tenth a column. Then you can highlight another one. That's your 3 tenths. And then your last one is your 4 tenths here. And then look, you also have 2 hundredths. That 2 is in the hundredths place. Hundredths are the individual small squares because there's 100 of them. There's 100 of these small squares in this whole hundreds grid. Now, let's look at 6 tenths. How would you shade in 6 tenths there? That 6 is 0.6. It's sitting in the 10th place. A tenth is a whole column here. Oh, excuse me here. Now, look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, excuse me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 tenths is 100. So each of these columns is one of the tenths. So there's 2 tenths, 3 tenths, 4 tenths, 5 tenths, and then 6 tenths. So then you see, okay, we see that 4 columns and 2 small squares is less than 6 columns and 6 small squares. So let's look at our next strategy here, our next way we can compare them. So we would say, oh, this is the same way. We would say 6 tenths is greater because 0.6 has 6 columns shaded in, while 0.42 only has 4 columns and 2 small squares shaded in. So look, this comparison symbol is opening up towards that larger decimal there. It is opening up towards that larger decimal. So let's go to our next slide here. Now let's compare using tenths and hundredths. So look at this. We've got our little mini place chart set up here. We've got the ones place, and then that whole is cut up into tenths and then hundredths, and the same thing over here. So you have a 4 in the tenths place, where here you have a 6 in the tenths place. So you only have a 4 in the tenths place, while here you have a 6 in the tenths place. So you can't say, oh, 42 is bigger than 6 because this is only 4 tenths. This is bigger. It has 6 tenths. So let's look at that explanation. 6 tenths has a 6 in the tenths place, while 42 hundredths only has a 4 in the tenths place. So you got to really pay attention to those places. Now, we can also compare decimals thinking of them as money. Money, 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 money. So look, we have 42 hundredths, 6 tenths. So that 4 is in the tenths place, right? Think of tenths as dimes. So let's write this down here. Tenths as dimes. Okay, shrink this down a little bit. And then the hundredths place, think of the hundredths as pennies. Remember, tenths, it was 10 of them. And then hundredths, it takes 100 of them. So those are like 100 pennies is in a dollar or is in 100. And then 10 dimes is in 100 or $1. So let's look at our justifications. 6 tenths is bigger because 0.6 is 6 dimes, which is 60 cents, while 0.42 is only 4 dimes and 2 pennies, which is 42 cents. So that's another way that you can think of it. If you want to pause and rewind this back, it might help you or slow it down, rewind it back. So let's just look at that again. This 4 is the tenths place, is sitting in the tenths place. And think of tenths as dimes because it takes 10 dimes to be a dollar. And it's 10 times 10 equals 100. And then think of your hundredths place as those pennies. And so this is 6 dimes because it's in the tenths place. And this is 4 dimes because it's in that tenths place as well. So 6 dimes is 60 cents. 4 dimes and 2 pennies is only 42 cents. Now, I want you to practice here. Pause this. See if you can solve these. 0.3, 0.56. Compare those. 0.9, 0.45, 2 tenths, 14 hundredths. See if you can open up to the greater decimal. I'm going to pause here. And then it says justify your answer. So use these justifications like the money. Use the justification like the tenths and the hundredths. Use that justification like the small squares and columns. So justify means just explain your answer. So go ahead and pause. Okay, hopefully you paused. We're going to go ahead and unpause. How did you do? Did you open up to 56 hundredths? Did you open up to 9 tenths? And make sure you don't get confused. So even though, even though 45 is bigger than 9, you don't look at it like that because you got to look at the individual places, right? And did you open up to 2 tenths and in that one? So let's look at our justifications here. 56 hundredths is bigger than 3 tenths because 56 hundredths is 5 dimes and 6 pennies, which is 56 cents, and is more than 30 cents. Because remember that this is 3 dimes. A lot of students get confused and think this is 3 pennies, but it's sitting in that tenths place, not the hundredths place. The hundredths place is the pennies. Now, how about this one? 0.9 or 9 tenths is bigger than 45 hundredths because 9 tenths has a 9 in the tenths place, while 45 hundredths only has a 4 in the tenths place. So we know that this is more. And what about this last one here? 2 tenths is larger because 2 tenths is 2 columns shaded in, while 14 hundredths is only 1 column and 4 small squares shaded in a grid. So it didn't matter which justification you had, just make sure you did open up towards that larger decimal. In this lesson, we looked at ways to think of decimals so we can compare them. Remember to keep practicing until you feel confident you can do it.